There we go. I think the microphone now works. We have an image. I think I'm live. Welcome to the stream. I'm Father Roderick, and it is Star Wars Hour, which means we're going to talk about Star Wars, and today, more specifically, about Star Wars Andor. We still have 3 more episodes to go. I'm so happy that this series, this first season, is 12 episodes, because it gives us time to really immerse us in the story. There's a lot I want to say about episodes 8 and 9. If you want to hear my review of the previous episodes, you can take a look at this channel. There is a playlist for all the Star Wars commentary. And I'm a little bit behind. I'm 1 episode behind because I got my COVID shot last week, and it knocked me off my socks for a couple of days, so I was unable to work. But this week I'm catching up, and so this is why I'm doing a commentary of both episode 8, Narkina 5, and episode 9, Nobody's Listening. And then I'm current, and tomorrow, this is recorded on Tuesday, and tomorrow we will have the first of the final trilogy of episodes of this first season before the long wait, because it's going to be more than a year before we will see what happens next in Cassian Andor's adventures. Thankfully, this is not the only Star Wars series that we have and will have. There is a lot more in store for us. I'm pretty sure that Disney will do anything they can to keep us subscribed to Disney Plus. So whenever there's a new series or an animated series, I'll definitely comment on that series here as well. And of course, there's also so much else that I would like to talk about. There's always Star Wars news. There is still an ongoing series that I started a while ago, which was a rewatch of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think I did 2 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. So I've already prepared all the other episodes, just never had the occasion to record it because Andor started. But maybe after I'm done with Andor, we can go back to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I can add some of my thoughts on that series. So yeah, plenty of stuff to do. If you like this kind of Star Wars talk, or if you're interested in my other commentary on anime, on popular series, superheroes, whatnot, this is the channel you want to subscribe to. So make sure you do that. And if you have if you're in the mood, give this video a thumbs up. Everything helps to spread the word. All right, let me get my ducks in a row. I don't know if you have anyone live yet. Probably not that many people right now because I haven't advertised it. But instead of spending too much time on posting the link to this live show, I'm just going to record this, and then later on, usually what happens is that people will rewatch this after I'm done recording it live. Plus, this is not just video. I'm also recording this as you could say the raw material for a podcast that I record for my patrons, and I will take the audio of the episode and I'll just sanitize it a little bit. Sometimes I'll condense it, and I'll add some audio fragments of the shows and some music and stuff. So if you're interested in that, take a look at patreon.com/Father Roderick. My patrons get that early access to that particular podcast. All right, let's start with Star Wars Andor Episode 8, Narkina 5. In this episode, I want to share why this whole story of the prison of Cassian Andor's stay in the Narkina 5 detention center is so important to the story. It's a very unexpected shift. We've seen mostly what happens on Ferrix. We've seen, of course, in episodes 4 to 6, the whole attack on the garrison at Naldani. And now all of a sudden, we move the story to a prison. Everything is visually super different from anything we've seen before in Andor. Why is that? It's actually, I think, essential to the story arc of Cassian Andor, and I will tell you why in a minute. But let's first take a look at the synopsis of this episode, and this is the one that is posted on Wikipedia. It's a very, very short summary. Cassian is brought to a prison on Narkina 5, where he spends every day working in a monotonous, heavy industry with hundreds of other prisoners. I would say probably even thousands. It's underground. Most of it is below sea level, so there is almost no escape possible. And we don't know exactly why he is. Well, we know that he was sent to prison because of a minor infraction, and it was just because he raised his voice to the judge that he was sentenced to, 6 or 7 years in prison. And but we don't know exactly what they're making there and what the deal is with this prison. We only know that it is super cruel. They have to walk barefoot, and they can basically put the whole floor under I don't know how many volts, but they can torture the prisoners by sending shocks, electrical shocks through their bodies, and they can even kill if they want to. So at night, when they all have to be in their quarters, by the way, no privacy whatsoever, no doors. It is like they're under constant surveillance. At least that's what we are meant to believe, and what the prisoners are meant to believe. During the night, that whole corridor is impossible to access because the floor is not lava, but the floor is deadly. So anyway, while we see these first days or shifts, actually they don't count in days at first, but in shifts, also because you're totally deprived from any contact with the outside world, they have no idea if the sun is shining or not. So they are just counting the time by these work shifts, and then you've got your sleep cycle. But while Cassian is getting used to life in prison, we then see what happens to Vel and Cinta, and these two travel to Ferrix to search for Cassian. And of course, they don't want to just catch up and hang out with him. They want to kill him because he's a liability. When Marva then falls ill, Bix attempts to contact Luthen to ask about Cassian's whereabouts, basically to tell Cassian to come home because his mother might not survive. But Luthen is very worried that he might be exposed to the Central Intelligence Bureau that may be monitoring these communications, and so he does not answer. And in this process, later on in the episode, we'll discover that Bix reveals her location, and that is something she will have to pay a very, very dear price for. And then at the end of the episode, Luthen leaves Coruscant and wants to meet with Saw Gerrera. We haven't seen him for a long, long time. And in fact, this is actually, I think, chronologically, probably the first time that we meet him in the story, because, of course, Rogue One is much later. So this is where we see this meeting, and Luthen is trying to get Saw Gerrera on board with the other rebels. We learn that the Rebel Alliance is not one monolithic organization. It consists of so many different groups. It's what I've also commented upon in earlier episodes, when we were talking about earlier episodes. Every rebel has his or her own cause. There is not this one ideal, the same motivation. And so because every rebel faction is in it for very particular reasons, it appears to be very difficult to bring unity among the rebels. This is, of course, the early stage of the rebellion. And it's interesting to see that there is actually so much division. And Saw Gerrera doesn't want to play along. He has this whole list of, well, those are separatists. I don't want to work with them. These guys are dumb. And there are, like, I don't know, more than 10 different groups within this whole rebel movement. And I think Luthen ultimately will have to figure out a way to bring people together. And we already get a glimpse of how he thinks he can accomplish this. And unfortunately, it's not in a very, you could say, ethical way. It's one of the things that he actually fights about with Mon Mothma, Because he feels like, you know what, the best way to bring people together is to let them experience that they have this common enemy that is so dangerous to all of them. And so they need to experience more of that oppression, because oppression is the birthplace of true rebellion. And, well, I'll talk a little bit more about his methods later on, but it's a tightrope that he's walking. So even though this meeting with Saw Gerrera doesn't result in a commitment from Saw, at least, we then see that Miro meets Karn. Cyril Karn is, of course, working in this almost Matrix-like office with thousands of other bureaucrats sitting behind a desk, and it's the job that his mother has somehow concocted for him through his uncle. But of course, it's the total opposite of what he wants. He thought he was going to be a hero. He felt like he was one of the few upstanding people that stood for the principles of justice and order. And now he's behind a desk and there's nothing he can do. It's just literally an ant in an ant farm. And so he is trying to still get more information about this Cassian Andor and to know what was truly going on Ferrix, because he also realizes that his superiors have basically lied about the whole incident at Ferrix because they don't want trouble. And this is where he is brought to the attention of Dedra. And so she confronts him and is like, what is this with all your requests for information about this Cassian Andor? What's going on? What are you doing? And, well, he gets to read the official report of the incident on Ferrix, and then he gets to give his version of the events. And that's how Dedra learns that there was actually much more going on, which then helps her to reconstruct what's at stake, what the rebels may actually be doing on a bigger level. So she uses that information to strengthen her cause at the Intelligence Bureau. Now, of course, Cyril Karn feels like, this is my moment. I can play a role here. I bring this valuable information. Please, please use me. Let me be part of this. And then Dedra just dumps him. She's like, yeah, whatever. No, go back to your desk. And don't you ever file these inquiries again, because, the consequences are going to be dire. And so this is a very, very difficult moment for Cyril, and you almost feel for him. He's like, oh my gosh, he really is exploited by the Empire, and in this case by Dedra. What's going to happen? The tension is only increasing. This guy wants out. He doesn't want to be imprisoned, and yet they confine him to his desk. And this is how the episode, I think, makes, at least thematically, an interesting parallel between what happens to Cassian Andor and what happens to Cyril Karn. And I've predicted in the past that maybe, actually, they're setting us up for a big confrontation later on, that Cyril Karn and Cassian Andor will come face to face, and maybe even ultimately, but I'm speculating here, will discover that they have more in common than they thought. They both want their freedom. They both have reasons to hate the Empire. They both feel wronged. So maybe they'll team up. I don't know. Or the opposite. Maybe this is why, opposites sometimes attract, sometimes they clash and explode. But with this information from Cyril Karn, Dedra leads a unit to Ferrix herself, and that's where she catches Bix, because they have been able to triangulate her position, and she is brought in for interrogation. And we will see what that entails in the subsequent episode, in episode 9. So this is the summary of the episode. What were my first impressions? As I said in the introduction, I think this is an extremely important new phase in Cassian Andor's life. When they first introduced him going to prison, I was surprised and maybe just as shocked as Cassian himself. I'm just a tourist. What have I done wrong? Why would you put me behind bars for so many years? In fact, I saw with other fans that some people even postulated that this must be a flashback. How can he go to prison for years? Maybe this is something that happened in the past. Well, no, it's actually what happens to him. And there, I think, is a very specific reason why they introduce this whole prison phase at this point in the story. Of course, every story has a beginning, a middle part, and an ending. And we are working our way towards the resolution. We're over half. Now, the first story arc was, of course, ended with this big confrontation on Aldhani, on the planet of Aldhani, where Cassian Andor is a very important, well, not a hero maybe, but definitely a very important person in making sure that attack has ends well. And now, so they raise our hopes. Maybe Cassian Andor himself feels like I finally have got stuff under control. And then you remember how he reacted at the end. Instead of embracing the ideals of the rebels, his attitude remains, I'm in it for my own sake. Just give me the money, give me the reward. I will just give you the rest. You've got plenty of money. You've got what you want. Now let me lead my life. And then he goes to Ferrix to try to invite his mother to join him, and maybe even Bix and some other friends. He's got plenty of money. And he feels like, okay, this is my time to just step out of it. I don't want to have anything to do with the rebellion, with the empire. Just let me have my own peaceful life. And this, of course, is a major issue, because we need to somehow see him transform from this kind of Han Solo type, like I'm in it for the reward and I don't care about your big ideals, to someone who will ultimately give his life for the cause of the rebellion. So what is going to make him change his point of view? It's what happens right now. He is thrown into prison, and for the first time in his life, he personally experiences the oppression of the empire, the being robbed of his freedom, of his own agency. He loses his future. Everything that he thought he had is now all of a sudden taken away from him, and he is relegated to this life in prison where you work on something that you don't even know what you're making. Like they're making these big, what is it? Like wheels, or it's very unclear what they're making. And maybe that's on purpose, because it's just this total senselessness. You're just a cog in this huge machine. You're no longer a human being. You've been reduced to basically a droid. The work is monotonous. It's every day. It's the same. For the Empire, you are no longer a person. You're just a tool for their bigger war machine. And this, I think, is going to plant the seed for, you could say, Cassian Andor's conversion to the rebel cause. For the first time, he experiences what so many other people have already felt and have gone through under the imperial oppression. And it is, I think, by what he is going to experience in this time that he is in prison, that he will ultimately understand why the rebellion is so important, why it's so vital. It's because it's no longer just about him. It's about all these other prisoners. He becomes, in a certain way, you could say maybe a Moses figure. These people in prison are slaves. And he has been endowed with certain talents to maybe get out, maybe even to lead an uprising in prison, maybe lead them to freedom. I am pretty sure that if this story follows kind of general Star Wars mythology and the conventions of Star Wars storytelling, there may actually be this awakening of this higher purpose that Luthen had already constantly hammered upon. He's like, do you want to spend your life with just the crumbs that fall off the table, or do you want to really go for the big ideal? And so far, Cassian has not chosen that. He keeps refusing his higher calling, and maybe he will have to experience the slavery himself. A little bit like Moses, who, even though he was raised at the court of the Pharaoh, it's only when he sees what happens to his people and he discovers that he's not Egyptian and that his own people, his own family is being tortured, is being killed, and is being kept in this eternal slavery, that Moses realizes, I need to do something. And that's where he opens up for his higher calling. And that's where God tells him, hey, I need you to lead my people into the desert. You're going to lead this uprising. I will make sure that you get out, but then it's up to you to lead them to freedom. It's going to be interesting to see if I'm right, but I'm almost certain that this is why we get this prolonged stay in this imperial prison. And then, of course, it may also be the cause for the reconciliation with his mother, because he didn't understand why his mother stayed on Ferrix. His mother is old, she's sick, and she refuses to go with him, and he thinks she's crazy. Why are you going to spend the rest of your short life here for the rebel cause? It's no use. It's a lost cause. And maybe only after his time in prison, he will realize that his mother was right and he was wrong. Will he be able to tell his mother that, or is it going to be too late? Something tells me that there may be tragedy in his future when it comes to his relationship with his mother. Or not. We'll see. Now, because of him experiencing personally the price that the free people have to pay now that they are being oppressed by the Empire, this is exactly what Rael tells Saw Gerrera. Oppression breeds rebellion. There's almost in Rael's view, it's a necessity that people experience the cruelty of the Empire. And we learn that this is one of the reasons that he wanted to do this attack on Aldhani, because he already knew that the Empire would strike back with incredible cruelty. This is also what happens. They double the prison sentences. Everything becomes more stricter. He basically, by this attack on Aldhani, gives the emperor and his minions a reason to be even more vicious. And it looks to me as if he knows what he's doing. He knows that this is the only way to mobilize everyone. Because as long as, I think at one point he even says, they're tightening their grip so slowly that we don't even feel it. I think that's what he says to Saw Gerrera. It's like the frog in boiling water, the metaphor. So if the Empire is just slowly, gradually putting more pressure on people, they get used to it. And I'll get back to this because this is also important in the psychology of that they're using to keep the inmates in line. And so Luthen knows that you need something that has shock value, that all of a sudden people will realize, but wait a minute, we don't want this anymore. We rise up. And this may be the only way to get all these different rebels on board and to get them to unite. Let's talk about this whole system of Narkina 5. What I thought was pretty brilliant in the way they told this story is that we get to experience from Cassian's point of view how the evil of the Empire, this kind of fascist way of submitting everybody to the will of the Emperor, how that also is just an essential part of the way that they have created this prison system, this is not a conventional prison. They're not trying to keep everybody imprisoned just behind bars. It's much more subtle and more evil. What they have done is to create competitiveness between the prisoners. They basically distract the prisoners from their lot and maybe also distract them from any ideas that they may have to try to escape by keeping them busy. Literally, they have to work in these very tough shifts. And there is immediate rivalry between all these different tables where they have these sprints. This is almost like what you see in certain companies. If you would look at, I don't know, maybe even Twitter headquarters or Tesla, or in a lot of factories and offices, you have this system where every once in a while, there will be this one project and it needs to be finished and there's a very super tight deadline. And if you don't meet that deadline, you get fired. And so everybody starts like, oh my gosh, we need to make sure that we keep our jobs. And so you get this heightened productivity, but also it distracts the people that are working there from maybe the bigger picture. Like, wait a minute, so what's going on with our company? Do I even like working here? You don't have time to think about that. You don't have time to research other jobs that you may want to pursue. No, you need to be the first to win the sprint. You need to focus. And this is exactly how they keep these prisoners in line. And then the table that loses, that is the slowest, they get actually punished. They will get these electrical shocks. It's a horrible system, but it clearly works. They keep everyone in line. Plus, what is even more evil is that instead of having just guards to keep the inmates in line, they use the prisoners themselves to keep each other in line. And this is where the character of, what's his name? Let me look that up. Where do I have that? Prussianite Rebellion. Where did I write that down? Sorry, this I'll cut this out in the audio recording. Oh, there you go. This is why we get introduced to Kino Loy. Played by the great Andy Serkis. What an amazing role he plays. Of course, this is not the first time that Andy Serkis is playing an important role in Star Wars. He was Snoke. But this time he's not playing an animated character. He is very recognizable. Actually, at first it was a little bit distracting. It's like, hey, Andy Serkis, is he also a prisoner? But his character, Kino Loy, is also a victim of this very evil system where he thinks, since he's on his way out, he thinks he will be free after finishing his shift. He is making sure that the other prisoners also stay in line. And maybe he even does that out of a certain ideal of like, hey, just as by following the rules, by working hard, I can gain my freedom. I want that for the other prisoners as well. So I have to keep them in line. Let's tell them what they should do so they can follow me towards freedom. Of course, later on we'll discover that actually that is a pipe dream, but he doesn't know that yet. But it's interesting to see how much at first he is Cassian's nemesis. He doesn't want to talk with Cassian about maybe, ways to get out of there. No, he thinks, he really believes, he has bought into the lie that if you just work hard, you will ultimately earn your freedom. I loved that tension between him and Cassian in this episode. Let's see, where was I? Yeah. Cassian is also one of the only people that sees the system and feels like this is not right. We should do something about this. All the others just follow the carrot that is being dangled in front of them. And this is part of why I'm starting to lose track of where I was in my story. What was I wanted? I need to cut this out. Let's see. So Cassian doesn't fall for this. He wants to get out of prison. And at first, it seems that... what's his name? I keep forgetting his name. Oh my gosh. I need to take better notes here. I'm so glad I get to edit the audio with this. Oh, and that is why Kino Loy is keeping a close eye on Cassian. All right. Here's something else that this episode reminds me of. So after the attack on Aldhani, the Empire decides to double all the sentences. And there is a reason. It's not just to keep people online. It's also to fan the flames of resentment towards the rebels. They blame the rebels for this upped security and this all these new measures. And this, of course, was a very common tactic of the Nazis during the Second World War. And you see this often in all sorts of other fascist situations. They are putting the blame on innocent people so that they don't get blamed. The Nazis, of course, were always pointing towards the Jews. They were spreading all these lies about how dangerous the Jews were. And they were able to create this resentment towards the Jews. And as long as people were starting to hate what supposedly the Jews were doing to their society, the Nazis could just stay, we're just keeping order. We're just making sure that you don't become the victim of the Jews, etc. And so it's a common fascist tactic to divide and conquer, to make sure everybody starts hating on everybody, and there is this resentment, and nobody trusts each other anymore. This is why, in our time, we should be so vigilant that we notice it when people are trying to create division. We need to be united we need to work together to build the future. And as soon as people are trying to create resentment towards certain groups in our society, or worse, fear of one another, that is where you have to be super vigilant. Like, who is profiting from this? Who has an interest in creating this division? Who is trying to get away with what they're doing by letting us focus on our internal division? I think in that respect, Andor has a very important message for the real world where we live, because we see what the consequences are if you don't notice what's truly going on. Dedra is climbing in rank swiftly because she's very ambitious, and she's not as corrupt and lazy as her colleagues. However, Cyril Karn has that same drive, that same ideal, but he gets interrogated, and then afterwards he gets dumped. Again, I feel like maybe they're setting things up for... like he's bottling up all this anger and resentment towards his mother, towards the Empire, towards, I don't know, maybe the people on Ferrix. that anger at one point will come out, and the question is, will he use it to try to obliterate Cassian Andor? That's totally possible. Maybe the Empire will use that anger and funnel it so they can have Cyril Karn confront and maybe even try to kill Cassian Andor. Or maybe this anger will actually turn. He will flip, and he will become a very important ally for the rebels. The story can go either way, and that's what I like about his character. It's so ambiguous. You don't know where this is going. The easy way would have been creating this romantic relationship between Dedra and Cyril. You know, they found each other. They have the same ideals. Of course, they will fall in love, and they will have plenty of fascist babies. They're not doing this in this episode, and also not in the next episode. Why? Maybe it's because they want us they want us to believe that these two are going to team up, whereas ultimately these two will become sworn enemies. Who knows? I have no idea. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. We haven't really talked about Mon Mothma that much. She continues her society life where she tries to help the rebellion by raising funds. She has had that confrontation, of course, with Luthen, because she knows now that Luthen is trying to make the Empire react, and she is telling him, but think of what this can cost. Think of how dangerous this is. She prefers to always follow the diplomatic conventions to see if she can secretly raise money for the rebels. It's a different approach, but she also has opposition from within her own life, within her own family. Perrin and Lyda keep acting in this very passive-aggressive way towards Mon Mothma, and we also now know that this whole marriage was basically an arranged marriage when Mon Mothma and her husband were just 15 years old. So, yeah, maybe these two were never meant to be together. And you can feel that this is creating tension, and it's more and more difficult. Maybe even Mon Mothma will blame herself for not being a good mother, or I don't know. There's definitely some more to this, and I think ultimately this will be of vital importance in the story arc of Mon Mothma. The best Easter egg. There are always a few Easter eggs in every episode of Andor. So what is the best Easter egg in this episode? I thought it was how much the whole visual aspect of Narkina 5 reminds me of George Lucas's first movie, the first movie that he directed, THX 1138. You know, of course, that they always use that code as Easter eggs everywhere in almost every movie that George Lucas has to do with. But THX 1138 was actually a student film that he did when he was still in film school, and later on he developed that as a standalone theatrical movie. It's a very dystopian movie. It's not an easy movie to watch. It's not very good. I mean, it's really weird, but it tells a story about people, like an entire society that is enslaved. People have to shave their heads, and they're being oppressed by this kind of almost empire-like regime, very fascist regime that punishes people whenever they cross the line, and it also creates this order by setting up people against one another. It's super dangerous if you try to escape. The consequences are not just dire for yourself, but also for your family. It's a horribly oppressive system, and the way the way George Lucas depicted it was in this almost abstract way where everybody was wearing these white overalls, no individuality. People had no names anymore, just codes, THX 1138. So it's the dehumanization that George Lucas wanted to to stress that this is what you get when you no longer look at people as people, but you rob them from their dignity and you just use them as cogs in a machine. The entire movie is about that, and this part of the story of Andor is following that same inspiration. It's the same warning in a certain way, and so that's why I appreciate that visually they also make it look very much like George Lucas's vision of society in THX 1138. Would be really interesting, I think, to rewatch that movie. I don't think it's on any streaming service right now, but you can get it on Blu-ray. There's actually I think a pretty good cleaned up edition of that available. It's not your typical George Lucas movie. It's very much in his experimental phase, but there's a lot there that they have now used for inspiration for this part of the story of Andor. What is the best quote in this episode? I think it's what Rael says to Saw. I'm the one who says, we'll die with nothing if we don't put aside our petty differences. This is a very important quote by Luthen. He knows that the only way to stand up against the Empire is by uniting, by uniting the rebels, by being one. You cannot, if there is internal division, you will never win it from the Empire. But if you team up together, this is a fundamental Star Wars theme. It's this whole idea of family, you know, a bunch of friends that trust each other are stronger. They are the David to the Empire's Goliath, because the Empire only creates an external unity through force, but that's very fragile. Whereas true friendship and true unity of ideals is stronger than any oppression. And so here, this quote, I think, is also a program for Luthen. This is what he wants to accomplish. He wants to unify the rebellion. What was my favorite scene? It was definitely the introduction of Kino Loy, Andy Serkis. I was surprised, but I was also like, oh, I'm so glad that he gets to play this important role. I love Andy Serkis. He's such an amazing, versatile guy. And I'm glad, because Snoke, ultimately, his storyline wasn't that important. And it almost felt like a waste of Andy Serkis's talent. Maybe one day they will do like a prequel series. How cool would that be to have like the early years of Snoke? They did do that in the comics, but I've read a few of those comic books where they tell the story of how Snoke trained Kylo Ren. I didn't care for it that much, but I don't know. But at least Andy Serkis is back in Star Wars, and I think he's amazing. What is the most important theme of this episode? I think it's the warning to our society, to our day and age, that you always have to be aware of the tactics of fascism. They always try to distract us. The less we think, the less we question why we are not getting our due. It's the whole classic idea of divide and conquer. And also the vigilance that is necessary. When Rael tells Saw, the Empire is choking us so slowly that we've started not to notice. It's this awareness that, wait a minute, if we are not vigilant, if we don't really see what's truly going on, it might actually be too late. So we need to rally together. That is his main reason for the raid on Aldhani. It wasn't just the money. That was important. But his ultimate goal was to unify people in this cause and to kind of make a stand against the Empire, knowing very well that the first reaction of the Empire would be very harsh and violent. Those were my thoughts about Episode 8 of Andor. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode and about this storyline. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let's move on to Star Wars Andor Episode 9, Nobody's Listening. The title is interesting. Nobody's listening. Why this title? It's a kind of a weird title. We will understand later on that this is a quote from Cassian. But you can also ask yourself, why is nobody listening? Is there a deeper meaning to this title? I think there is. And I think it has to do with the difference between the rebels and the Empire. I'll explain later. But let's first take a look at the synopsis of this 9th episode. Olaf, an older member of Cassian's prison work crew, is euthanized by a medic as he can no longer work effectively after having a stroke. The medic secretly confirms to Cassian and work manager Kino the rumors spread of the murder of hundreds of prisoners on Level 2. A prisoner who was just released was sent back to Level 2, forcing the prison to kill the entire level of prisoners to cover up the mistake. Cassian and Kino realize that the prison will never let them go, finally convincing Kino to join Cassian's scheme with their fellow prisoners to escape. Meanwhile, Miro tortures Bix for information and realizes that Cassian may have been involved in the Aldani attack, but she fails to learn anything about Luthen. The ISB were able to capture a rebel pilot working for Anto Krieger, who reveals a power station on Spellhouse is said to be raided by Krieger's group. Mon Mothma reunites with Vel, revealed to be her cousin, and encourages her to keep a low profile, maintaining the facade of a rich and politically uninvolved young woman. Mon Mothma and Kolma continue working to covertly gather funds for rebel activities. To better cover up their activities, Kolma is forced to bring in a Chandrilan banker named Davo Skulden, who wants to meet with Mon Mothma. Cyril meets Dedra again, and again is rejected by her. She doesn't want anything to do with him. This is, in a nutshell, a very brief summary of the main story beats. The most important one, of course, is this awakening of both Cassian and the other inmates, that they will never regain their freedom, no matter how hard they work. And this is when, when I was commenting on the previous episode, I said that Luthen was convinced that in order for people to rebel, to rise up against the oppressor, you need to have a shock to the system. Otherwise, we just get used to the new system. We tend to adapt. But when there is something dramatic happening, where you are confronted in person with the cruelty of the Empire, that's where you will start to rebel. And this is why, in this episode, we get to see the death, the killing, basically, the active killing of Olaf. And I thought this was one of the most heartbreaking parts of the story so far. You see Olaf, and from the moment we meet him, we see he's old, he's sick, he's got trembling hands, and for a while, Cassian is trying to help him. So every time he pushes him aside, and he says, "Let me do this," and so they can win these sprints, and they don't get punished. But no matter how much he tries to compensate for Olaf's illness, it's not enough, and Olaf gets a stroke. And then you get that heartbreaking scene where the two of them, Olaf and then Cassian and Kino, are left in this tube, this transition. What is it? This walking tube between the factory hall and their quarters, and the situation is dramatic. And of course, both Cassian and Kino are trying to keep him alive. Stay with us. You're almost there. Hold on to this. We're going to get you. We're going to pull you through. So they are rooting for Olaf, and that's where another inmate arrives. He's from a different division. He's wearing an overall, white overall with blue stripes. And he just immediately shows them that as a prisoner, you don't count for the Empire. They don't care for you. Something that Cassian actually already knew. And he says, "Hey, fellow," and then Cassian is almost angry. He's like, he's got a name. He's called Olaf. And he's like, I don't want to know his name. And then he calls the guard. He says, "Give me a bag." Basically saying, I need a garbage bag because this guy is finished. And he forces Cassian and Kino to assist him in euthanizing this poor old man. And that is where I think for Cassian and for Kino, it starts to sink in that the Empire doesn't listen. It's not just that they're not overhearing their conversations as prisoners, but they don't truly care for their prisoners. They don't see that these are human beings. To the Empire and to the system, these are just tools that you can dispense with. If a tool is broken, you throw it away and you get another inmate to replace them. And once they start to realize that, that is where the rumors that were already spreading, that something happened to this other section, these other inmates, that those rumors were actually true, and that the Empire made a mistake. And this one prisoner who was supposedly being freed was actually just transferred to another part of the factory. But unfortunately for the Empire, he was brought back to his same division. And so everybody knew at once that they would never be free, which of course breaks the system. The carrot that they were dangling in front of the prisoners was, if you work hard enough, you will get out. You will be free. You will be able to go back to your family. And now these prisoners know it's all a lie, which makes them useless to the Empire. Because the moment you stop believing in the system, people will start to rebel. And that's why they are all killed. And this is what finally awakens Kino to the reality that they need to escape. They need to get out of this. And that's where he joins Cassian's plight. And this is why my favorite scene of the entire episode is the final phrase, what Kino tells Cassian when he keeps asking him, how many guards are there per floor? And he says, only a maximum of 12. No more than 12. And that's when you know, he's on board. This is going to work. And we kind of already know, we anticipate this because, of course, Cassian is not going to stay in prison for the remainder of this series, which then already kind of makes us feel like, okay, so the next episodes are going to be about this prison escape. That's one of my favorite tropes when it comes to prison movies. How are they going to escape? You cannot dig a tunnel. It's undersea. So how are they going to make it up to the surface again? I think we're in for an amazing conclusion of this first season. Maybe I was also thinking maybe this whole idea of him having to climb back to the surface is also thematically already a precursor or a promise of what will happen at the end towards the end of Rogue One, where they have to climb into that tower to destroy the satellite dish. Maybe there's some rhyme here, or some Star Wars rhyme. Who knows? Let's see. Yeah. The interaction between Dedra and Cyril was also bone-chilling. I thought it was so creepy that he was just stalking her and waiting, and he really wants to be free of this job that his mother gave him. He wants to get out. He wants to join the Empire. And again, Dedra is like, I don't want to hear from you. Get out of here. Get out of my face. She's clearly disturbed. And again, Cyril he's almost in love with her. But I don't think it's not a romantic love, but he's in love with her position. He wants in. He sees in her the realization of his own failed dreams, which makes it even more heartbreaking that he's being rejected again and basically sent back to his place. He's a nobody to Dedra. Wow. I love that tension. I don't know how they are going to pay this off, but I think this will be so important to the story arc of Cyril Karn. But it's also, the reason it's so chilling is also that you see that in the Empire itself, there is no room for love, for some kind of like, oh, I see myself in you. No, it's so cold and distant. Even Cyril Karn is just a tool for Dedra. He is only useful because he helps her in her career, but the moment she doesn't need him anymore, he's discarded. So he too experiences how it feels to be rejected, how to be a nobody. I keep believing that this may be something that will turn him, that will flip him for the rebellion, but I'm not sure. It's just a hunch. There was another thing that I thought was interesting in the way they depict this really strange relationship between Cyril and Dedra. This emotionless focus on the ideals. There's no room in our careers for friendship and love. It almost reminds me of what the Jedi were preaching. A Jedi has to focus on the Republic, on the well-being of the people. There is no room for romantic relationship. A Jedi should live a celibate life, totally dedicated to the cause, never thinking about himself, always thinking about others. There is something that is also feels a bit bloodless in the Jedi Order. And of course, we've seen with Anakin that can also be very risky for someone like Anakin, who is ambitious, who has all these feelings, who also feels rejected by his fellow Jedi, and he cannot become a Jedi master. That leads him to the other side, to the dark side. So could it be that the whole dynamic between Cyril and Dedra rhymes with Anakin's fall from grace and his fall to the dark side? It's the same disappointment. It's the same feeling of not being valued. Everybody wants to be valued. Everybody wants to be told, you matter. And it's because Anakin felt that and of course, Palpatine was fanning the flames of that resentment. But Anakin started to believe that he didn't count, that he was just second-rate Jedi. And whereas Palpatine was constantly feeding this hunger for acceptance and to be valued. And he said, you are so talented, join me. I will make you big. This is also why Darth Vader fails to convert Luke to the dark side. Because there's a huge difference between Anakin and Luke Skywalker. Luke was feeling valued by the rebels. He had friends. He had Han. He had Leia. He had the other rebels. And so if you have that bond and that if you feel valued, the dark side has no grip on you. I think there are going to be some lessons learned later on in this story here. The disregard of the Empire for the humanity of its subjects, I think, becomes ultimately their Achilles heel. It's the small exhaust port, of the Death Star. They are not listening. No one is listening. They don't care. And this is why there is room among the rebels to forge these bonds of friendship and solidarity. And the Empire doesn't understand that because they don't care. It's the one thing that is never valued in their fascist regime. It's how much individual people matter, how much respect for people's dignity matters. And because they cannot see, because they're blind to that, that is why these rebels can ultimately be successful. The Vel subplot, to me, is the least interesting so far. I have to say, this is my only point of criticism on this episode. I also realize you can't do that much in the span of such short episodes. But I feel like the whole story of Vel and then her involvement with Mon Mothma, even Mon Mothma's story arc, it all feels a bit repetitive. It was like in this episode, nothing changes for her. She's just doing what we already saw her doing in the previous episode. I feel there's not much urgency in what she's doing. She's just taking her cab, visits Luthen, she goes to a party, she tries to raise some money, she has some family trouble, and yeah, haven't we seen that before? So I hope that they will start to beef up that story a little bit more. It is, of course, tragic to see that in this Imperial Senate, things are going downhill very rapidly. What once was the vibrant center of democracy, it's now almost an abandoned place. You literally can see while she is doing her speech, she's standing up against, these reinforced security measures and the overreach of the emperor. While she is talking about these important things, the lights of all the other Senate seats are turning off. People are leaving the room. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody is listening. Also in the Imperial Senate, nobody's listening to the warning that Mon Mothma is sharing, and so that too becomes part of the downfall of the Republic. People are, or the Empire at this stage, is because they don't listen anymore. They don't care anymore. They have gotten used to the system of the Empire. This is why they ultimately lose everything. They don't care enough. Another part of the story that I thought was chilling and impressive was, of course, the whole torture scene with Biggs and Dedra. In the first few episodes, we were kind of rooting a bit for Dedra because she was trying to win from her fellow Imperials, and she was successful. She was like, yeah, you go. I mean, it's never good to root for an Imperial officer, but the story made us still want to see her rise up in the ranks. But now we see that she is not rising towards redemption. She is just one of the worst in the Empire. Her methods are ruthless. Her demeanor is devoid of any compassion. She is downright scary. And so this whole torture scene was horrible, was really hard to watch, especially when she explains that the sounds that they use to torture Biggs are actually the recorded sounds of children that are being butchered. I don't recall Star Wars ever going this dark. It's horrible. And then the way they film the beginning of this torture scene visually is identical to the torture scene of Leia in the Death Star. The door closes, you see the footsteps of the guard outside of the door. And so this is clearly visual rhyme with A New Hope. But it also gives that torture scene of Leia much more weight, because ultimately they spare us in A New Hope, right? We just see the door close. There is this little interrogation droid with the syringe, but that's all we see. But with Biggs, they actually show us how much pain they inflict upon the people that are being interrogated. And so, in retrospect, you can think, well, oh my gosh, what did Leia have to go through? She must have suffered tremendously. I wonder actually if in the radio plays they will give us more. There is this official radio play that they recorded with a lot of the actors from the movies. It's amazing. If you've never listened to it, go look for it. It is fantastic. And it's basically an expanded canon story of what happens in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi. But mostly A New Hope has a ton of extra information that we don't get to see in the movie. I need to go back and listen. Maybe if you know, let me know in the comments if there's any more detail about the interrogation of Leia. I wouldn't be surprised if they took inspiration for this scene from the expanded interrogation scenes in A New Hope. With all this drama and all these shocking moments, there's one thing I believe that is sorely lacking. I understand why it's not there, but I still miss it because it's an integral element of any good Star Wars story, and that is humor. There are no funny droids here, no wacky aliens. There are no one-liners that make you laugh. There is basically no relief. There's no humor whatsoever in this episode. I believe it's on purpose, so that you too feel this oppression. Some humor can be like this moment of relief. Like you're like, oh, thankfully we can still laugh about that funny, droid or something like that. But none of that here. None of that here. So you actually start having that same feeling like, oh, we need to get out of here. We need to end on a positive note. How are we going to get back to a certain sense of normalcy? We need to escape from this oppression. It's amazing storytelling. They are constantly like setting up things and making us feel all sorts of feelings. The way they tell this story, it's amazing. I've never seen something like that in Star Wars. What was my favorite Easter egg? That's a hard one. I didn't write anything down here. Let me think. Is there a particular Easter egg? I don't know if it was in this episode or if it was in the previous episode, but at one point we see Cyril Karn talking to his mother in the kitchen of his mother's apartment. And she's criticizing him again and again and again. And at one point, he takes up the bowl with cereal and the blue milk, and he starts to slurp. And he makes that sound so he doesn't hear his mom. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, the way that was done. It's very subtle, but he's like, I don't want to hear her. I don't want to listen to her. Again, it's the theme of nobody's listening. Cyril Karn is done listening to his mother. He wants to drown out the ongoing criticism. So he tries to drown her comments in slurping blue milk. Fantastic. My favorite scene was, of course, the final scene of the episode where Kino finally caves in and tells Cassian what he has been wanting to know for many, many shifts. How many people per floor? Only 12. Finally, Cassian's insistence is rewarded here. This was also, I think, this is also my best quote. Only 12. There's so much power in that last phrase. What is the most important theme? What's the takeaway of this episode? For me, it is that we are being shown the ultimate consequences of a culture of death. Of course, this episode shows us euthanasia, basically. As a Catholic priest, I'm convinced that is not the solution to human suffering. It is the sign of a defeat of a society that doesn't know how to take care of people that are suffering, how to stay close with them. It's a very difficult topic, of course, because we feel so powerless. We think it's the only way out. But this episode, I think, signals us that this is ultimately robbing people from their dignity. Why kill someone if you could also, and in a way, Cassian and Kino show us what you should do. And that is to stay with the person who is dying, to try to do whatever is in your power to help that person to hold on to life. And the Empire is just there to dispose with the tool. One of the things that Pope Francis keeps repeating, and I think he's right about that, is we have to be so careful that we're not turning our societies into cultures of death, where we turn our societies into throwaway societies where we don't value someone unless that person is useful or feels useful. When you don't feel valued anymore, when you are old and sick, and you feel like you're a burden to everyone, and maybe people will just tell you you are a burden, or they don't care for you anymore, then sometimes people are driven to the point where they feel like, well, just kill me. I don't want to be a burden anymore. But what a sign of us giving up on one another. For me, this is emotional. This is so important, what this story is telling us. It's not a real solution. It's a sign of us dehumanizing one another. When the value of a human being is reduced to his or her usefulness or productivity, the end result of that is a culture of death, where we throw away people that we don't value, whether it is at the end of life or at the origin of life, at the beginning of life. And I think that, and I don't know if this is purposefully done in this story, but it makes me think, like, what is the value of life? Do I value people for who they are instead of how useful they are? Even as someone who works in the church, I have to ask this. If you look at the dark pages of the Catholic Church throughout the centuries, where does it derail? Where does people of the church do the most horrible things? It's always when they start looking at other people as a tool for their own gratification. Think of abuse, for instance. But think of embezzlement, of these moments in history where they would kill people that weren't useful to the church because they didn't want to convert. Well, then your life is worth nothing to us. It's the total opposite of what the gospel tells us to do. It's the total opposite of what we see Jesus do, who never, ever discards anyone. When people are dying, he is at their side. He goes to visit the lepers, even though they're super contagious and nobody wants to be anywhere near these people. He embraces them, he kisses them, and he heals them. Jesus constantly hangs out with people that have been discarded by society and even have been discarded by the religious leaders. And he constantly tries to imprint on people that they need to care for the poor and for the widows and for the sick. He even makes it personal. He says, if you don't care for the children, for the sick, for the elderly, for the widows, for the orphans, you don't care for me, because I am them. And if you do help the little people, the poor, the sick, you do that to me. And you will be judged on exactly that. Your ticket to heaven is not how many times you've been to church. You will be asked, what have you done for the people in need? Were they just a tool to you? Were you only interested in people if they were of use to you? Or did you value them for who they truly are? Luminous beings, children of God our Father. That is why this episode was so important to me. Love to hear your thoughts, your reactions, your commentary. Let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching this all the way through the end. Now, as you've noticed, sometimes in my commentary, I lose track of where I am. I get distracted or I lose my train of thought. This is why I also work hard on editing everything together and condensing this into a podcast that you can listen to when you're commuting or anything. I do that for my patrons, people that help me to continue this kind of work. So if you want to join them and check out that podcast, go over to patreon.com/Father Roderick. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.